So you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that it's you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, Dapper Dinosaur here. As I'm sure you know, I am here with TJ. We're actually going to put TJ on full screen because you guys know what I look like. So, there you go. We're here for Leaving on Earth Creationism. For any of you who might not be familiar with that, that is where I have someone on and we discuss their exit from Leaving on Earth Creationism. I also want to point out that you might notice the background has the Cambrian bunny. That is because voting for the Cambrian Bunny Awards is still going on. If you want to vote for Worst Behaved Creationist, Creationist with the Worst Argument, Best Overall Creationist, what was it? Oh, and Worst Use of the English, or Creationist with the Worst Use of the English Language, all for the year 2021. You can check that out. Just go to my stream there. There will be links to videos where you can hit like to vote. So that'll be running for another 2 or so weeks. But don't want to get too far into that because we here with TJ, who goes by @Deacon of Biology on Twitter. You can find that linked in the description. And TJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into your history with young Earth creationism?
So currently I am a PhD student at the University of Tennessee, study geomicrobiology. Basically, we're interested in carbon sequestration, so carbon fixation in deep subsurface communities associated with hot springs around subduction and subduction zones, tectonic plates.
Awesome. That is something I know very little about, but it sounds really cool.
Yeah, I love it.
If it's not big enough to have bones, I probably don't know that much about it.
Yeah, well, this is definitely the case.
So now you were a young Earth creationist. That's why you're here. So when did you become a young Earth creationist?
It was so I was born into it. And so, yeah, I was a young Earth creationist from as long as I can remember up until I was about 23
Okay.
when I started questioning. And I was I think I was about 26 before I actually understood or accepted the fact of evolution.
Okay. So were you going to a church that was young Earth creationist? Is that?
So my family, it was a little bit different. So we had a church that we went to probably from the time that I was like 3 up until I was about like 6 or 7, and then we switched churches, and then so I was probably going to church on and off until I was about 14 years old.
Okay.
And they were all, I don't know if you know anything about Southern Baptist, but it was Southern Baptist church, and they tend to be very fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And it was evolution was frowned upon in the church.
Okay.
I actually had a Sunday school teacher tell me that evidence against evolution is the fact that women have one extra rib, or yeah, women have an extra rib that men don't have, which is factually incorrect.
Right, just not true. Now, it is the case that rib count does vary in humans a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people who are born with a bit less or a bit more than the normal number, but it is not along like sex lines or anything like that. It's
right. Yep.
Yeah, it's the same thing with vertebra count, right? Vertebra count varies every once in a while. You can get someone with an extra or a fewer vertebra, and that's That one was actually, fortunately, not one that I was told when I was a kid, because I mean, I think someone at my church like looked into it and they were like, "Yeah, that's not true."
Yeah, it was actually my mom because I told my mom it was after vacation Bible school is what it was.
Oh, okay.
And I went up to my mom afterwards and I told her about it, and she's like, "Well, that doesn't sound correct at all." So she basically went and talked to the guy and told him, "Look, I accept young Earth creationism. I am a young Earth creationist, but this whole idea of teaching them that a female has an extra rib that a man doesn't will cause them to question things, if you know what I mean."
Yeah, well, that's one of the problems with young Earth creationism is that it's full of things are obviously not true when you look into them.
Yep.
And yeah, that's gonna cause you to question the whole thing pretty easily.
Yeah.
Okay, so so after 14, you were not regularly going to church, but you were a young Earth creationist for the next 9 or so years, right?
Yeah. So for me, it was I was I would call myself devoutly religious because from the as long as I remember, as far back as I can remember, I wanted to be a preacher, and actually that's what got me on this whole looking into creationist claims was that path, and to because I wanted to preach against what I saw as evolution. So that's what wound up getting me down that path. But I was devoutly religious until I was about 20. I should say not devoutly religious. I should say devoutly fundamentalist is how I should put that, because just because you're religious doesn't mean that you are young Earth creationist.
Right. Although the converse never seems to be the case. I've yet to meet a young Earth creationist who wasn't very religious,
Right? Yeah.
which
Yeah. True
is
story.
to me suspicious because it's one of those
Yeah.
things where it's like literally no one who doesn't have a prior theological commitment comes to
Yep.
the evidence and comes away thinking what young Earth creationists think, which you'd think there should be a few if it's true.
Right. Yep. And that's why the whole idea of intelligent design is problematic, because they say it's not religious in nature, but you have to. It tends to be, from my experience, religious uh, fundamentalist people that say that they are intelligent design proponents.
Yeah, it's when you dig down to it, it's almost always comes to, well, it was God who did the intelligent designing. It's like, okay, but can we just stop pretending that that's not what you think? Because it is.
Right.
It
Yeah.
obviously is. Everyone knows it.
Exactly. Yep.
And actually, I would not really complain if they were just open about it. I'm like, okay, yeah, now we can have a discussion. We don't have to pretend that you're doing this from some secular point of view.
Yeah, that actually, speaking of the intelligent design, sorry, it just popped in my head. The video um, Creationist Myths did, where he was interviewing Dr. Behe. That's what
mhm.
I found interesting, was that Dr. Behe is one that pushes this idea of intelligent design, yet he accepts that there could be common descent, which I don't know how those two things go hand in hand. Like, he literally said that in the
Basically,
interview.
I think, and I don't want to talk for Dr. Behe, but I have read a fair bit of his work, and I'm familiar with it to some degree. I believe that what he would go with is say that there are certain events in the history of life in which God intervenes to intelligently design some system,
Okay.
but that for the most part, evolution proceeds more or less as mainstream science would expect. And
Okay.
so that there actually is this 3 billion year history or so of life, and that there is this common ancestry. But here and there, like maybe at the origin of eukaryote cells, God steps in and adds some little spice into there to make that work. And then
Right.
later on, maybe as vertebrates are becoming more and more complex, he adds in a few little blood clotting factors so that we can get from the relatively simple blood clotting you get in basal vertebrates like cyclostome fish up to like mammal or reptile blood clotting cascades, which are just absurdly complicated.
Yeah.
And maybe God
Yeah.
just stepped in and sprinkled that into a few ancient fish or something. I don't know.
Put a little bit in there.
Yeah, you just take the salt shaker that's labeled intelligence and you just shake it in to the genome, and every few 100 million years you just do that quickly.
Yep.
Um, so when you were a young Earth creationist, were there any, I guess, sort of like professional or prolific creationist figures like Kent Hovind or Ken Ham or Dwayne Gish or something that were a big part of where you got your ideas about young Earth creationism?
That's where my story deviates from some creationists that you've interviewed. Is I wasn't actually introduced to Kent Ham or Ken Hovind until I was 23 and actually started looking into the claims. Um, for me, uh, it wasn't these um, well-known names in creation circles that helped back my uh, creationist view, or helped me to find anti-evolution ideas. Um, my problem was the thing that kept me in creationism. I guess this might be a little tangent off of your question, but so no. To answer the question shortly, it was that no, there wasn't anybody. It was just my family. But what kept me in young Earth creationism so long was the problem of original sin, um, and that's what kept me into young Earth creationism so long.
Okay, could you talk a little bit about that? Why is it that original sin was something that kept you as a young Earth creationist?
So growing up as a fundamentalist, you're taught that the book of Genesis, the Bible in itself is literal. It's a literal word of God. And that Genesis, especially when it says when it says a day, it means 24-hour days. It means that the world was created in a 24, I mean, in seven 24-hour periods, and that it was created roughly about 6,000 years ago, give or take. And the problem of original sin, what that is, and this is, I'd be willing to bet that 95 to about maybe 99% of younger creationists, this is their major sticking point, um, is that for evolution, okay, so before Adam and Eve, there was no death, there was no suffering, there was no disease, there were no thorns, no thistles, nothing of that nature. Um, and Adam, when he ate the apple, he brought sin into the world. However, if evolution's true, for evolution to be true, you have to have death, you have to have suffering, you have to have adaptation. So therefore, that means that before Adam and Eve ever existed, there was death, suffering, pain, all this going on for billions of years before Adam and Eve ever existed. And then Adam and Eve came into the world, whether that be like a spiritual introduction, a spiritual awakening, I don't know. But if sin, or this word that we call sin, was already in the world at the time, then what was the purpose of Jesus coming and dying for our sins? So that was the one thing, because I absolutely believed that Jesus 100% came and died on the cross for our sins, um, and that for that to be true, death and suffering couldn't exist prior to Adam eating the apple.
Okay.
I hope that makes sense.
No, well, I mean, it makes sense in terms of the
Yeah.
internal logic of fundamentalist Protestant Christianity.
Right.
I
And
don't think it makes a whole lot of sense overall, but you know.
no, I mean, and that's a strong, it's a really, really strong motivator, especially when you believe that that questioning it, or not necessarily questioning it, but asking the wrong questions is a one-way ticket to hell.
Right.
Like hell, that whole idea of internal damnation is a thing that will keep you on the straight and narrow, if you
Right.
know what I mean.
Okay. So now you said that you were introduced to people like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind at 23, and you're still a creationist at this point, but this is going to be, I guess, is this the thing that starts the transition, is finding out about these guys?
Yeah. So what happened was I was in the military for well, at this point I was in the military for about 5 years, and I wanted to get out and become a young Earth creationist preacher. Like I literally wanted to go out and preach against the evils of evolution, or the evils of evolution and so what I started doing was I wanted to know what the arguments against evolution were. Like I'd had experiences with people in the military who accepted evolution, and I've seen the conversations between them and other creationists that I worked with, and it just got the wheels turning. Like if I came from a monkey, then I wanted to know what the arguments were for that, what the arguments were against that. So I started digging into YouTube and looking at um, other websites, and it tend to be creationist dominated websites at the time, because well, I mean, people tend to try to go with those things that support their biases. And it's kept coming across the same arguments, and I was like, well, these arguments are so simple. Like it just to me at the time, in that mindset, it just made sense. It's like, well, then why are all these scientists uh, saying that evolution is a scientific fact? I don't understand, and I don't understand how somebody can make this argument that sounds like it's logically sound in that state. That it sounds like, okay, evolution is problematic, and then you can hear that argument, and other people hear that argument, and yet scientists are saying, well, evolution is true. So I was like, okay, so what's the science side of the house actually saying? Let me put away these creationist sources, and let me actually dive down into literature and see what's happening. And I started with websites like Talk Origins. I don't know if you've heard of Talk Origins.
Yes, I have.
But but yeah, so I started with websites like Tark Origins. I started going back and watching documentaries from Discovery Channel, and then I just started. I mean, with YouTube, I just started finding people who were talking about evolutionary ideas, and found Christians that were Christian and accepted the theory of evolution, and it just started a snowball effect, and eventually it just arrived at the conclusion that um, the evidence, there's so much evidence out there that evolution is a fact. There's, I mean, I would almost say, I would be willing to bet that there is more evidence that biological evolution happens than there is that the Earth is spherical. I mean, if you had a stack of papers for the scientific research that involves evolution in it in some capacity, it's going to far outweigh the papers out there that talk about how we know the Earth is spherical.
That by that measure, yeah, that may well be. Huh. I never really try to figure out which is the best supported of the theories, but like, yeah, I guess if you measure it just by like number of supporting papers, there probably is more in biology for evolution than there is for the sphericity of the Earth. I don't know.
I
Um,
would think so because I mean, you've got microbiologists like myself that study microbes living in the subsurface and how they adapt to their environment and how they acquire genes, horizontal gene transfer. You've got virologists that study, I mean, like COVID-19 and the all these disease progressions, and other microbiologists that also study this stuff. So you've got all these different avenues inside of microbiology just in itself, and then you think about all the papers out there that explore adaptation in different other and all these other species. I would almost feel like that. I don't want to say it's 100%, but I'm about 99% certain.
okay. So what was it about? Because so it was Ken Hammond and Ken Hovind who, correct me if I'm wrong, who really kind of started you into the investigating the claims and whatnot. And actually, I guess before that, I want to ask you: did you think that there was, when you were still a young Earth creationist, and you're starting to look into this, did you ever think that there was some kind of like conspiracy? Because one of the things that I get asked sometimes is young Earth creationism a conspiracy theory? And my answer is I think sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't.
Right.
Because if you know much about what happens in like the scientific literature and how completely ignored everything about young Earth creationism is, like if you read Nature,
Mhm.
basically no one even mentions the work of like Andrew Snelling or Jeffrey Tompkins or any of these people, right? It's no one cares.
Right.
And so if you're a young Earth creationist and you're familiar with that, for me it seems hard to imagine that you would think anything other than that there must be some kind of conspiracy. So did you think that there was some kind of like, oh, the scientists, they know they're wrong, but they have this, this bias or conspiracy against creationism because they want to be atheists or whatever? Was any of that part of your thought process?
So I've heard it before, but for me, no, it wasn't. And the reason why I would say that, it's probably kind of off the wall reason, but um, I remember being about 9, 10 years old and asking my dad about um, how salvation worked and how to get into heaven you had to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And I asked him, I was like, well, you got all these tribes out there, or you got all these people that have not been met. I mean, there are still isolated populations out in Amazon and other locations that have not heard of the Bible or heard of Jesus or anything like that. So how do they does God just condemn them to hell?
Right.
And his answer to me was that no, they'd be judged on their works. Well, I was like, well, that's kind of a loophole there. So I kind of extrapolated on that, and I was like, well, if there's people in the world that uh, live their life without knowing that of this God figure or this Jesus person, then there are probably people in this world that have heard of the story and or heard of their works, and um, don't accept it, not out of spite, but just because they just haven't accepted it. And I mean, that's one thing I will say is like my while I was a young Earth creationist, while my family was a young Earth creationist at the time, which my mother and father both are not any longer, but um, my dad did have examples when I would ask him questions like that. Instead of telling me not to ask those questions, he would actually give me examples like that, which kind of got the gears turning in my head.
Hmm.
So no, I thought that scientists were misguided. I thought that scientists were um, were bringing their theories further than they should. Like I understood at one point. I don't remember how old I was, but I understood that bacteria can adapt to their environment. I understood that humans could adapt to their environment because we have people with darker and lighter skin. We have people that can live in higher altitudes. So I knew adaptation was a thing. But I thought that scientists saw that and were just extrapolating from that and saying, um, ergo, we can go from an ape to a human. But then whenever I would think about ape to human, I thought that scientists literally believe that an ape would give birth to a human. Like I had no understanding
Right.
of
Like a gorilla mom is surprised to find that she has a human baby.
what is this skinless, I mean, this hairless baby I have.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, so no, I never thought that there was a conspiracy. I never thought that scientists had any ill will. I wasn't like, I think it's Ken Ham and Ken Hovind both, and there's a couple others out there um, that will say that the reason why scientists accept this thing or push this thing is because they want to live in sin. But that whole idea has never made sense to me because it's like, well, I mean, that's like sitting there and trying to get away with a crime in front of a police officer and thinking that if you just ignore the police officer, you're not going to suffer the consequences. It's
Hmm.
not logical.
Yeah. It does seem like if you know that you're wrong, but you think that if you were right about this, then there would be better consequences for you. That's
Mm,
not the kind of thing that generally leads people to actually just go with that, right?
right.
Now, maybe some people. There's a lot of people out there who do weird stuff. So maybe someone out there, but it does seem like it's very unlikely that all of the world's like smartest people are just like, well, I know God is real, and I know I shouldn't be doing all these things. But if I pretend he's not, then problem solved. Like I don't think these people are thinking that way.
No, not at all. I didn't either at the time, but I've heard that argument
I
before.
have to.
I've got three brothers, and one of them is a creationist. He would be an old Earth creationist, and at least from what he's been talking about.
Okay.
And whenever I first started going through this transition period, I guess that's what you would call it. Um, he would he would try to bring arguments like that up, like this whole theory was just brought about so people could justify living in their sin, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me.
No, I don't think any scientific theory was brought up for that reason. Um,
No, not at all.
yeah. Now there were some that were perhaps a little bit brought up to counter some aspects of religion. For instance, Lyle is pretty much on record saying, like, yeah, I wanted to get people away from using Genesis as their textbook for geology. And
Right.
so, like, okay, but it wasn't because he wanted to go around and doing, I guess, sinful things, as
Right.
you might define it by Christian standards. Like, that wasn't his goal. It wasn't like, oh, I want to live a wicked, sinful life, so I'm going to prove that Sicker Point couldn't have formed in a flood.
Right. Yep.
Um, actually, we have that. So some friends of mine, people who've been on the channel and whatnot, we have a Kent Hovind debate bingo, and
Oh, word.
you just want to sin is one of the squares on the bingo card.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah, that's how we get through those while staying sane. Because sometimes it's a friend of ours who's doing the debate, so we want to watch and support our friend, but like also it's a Kent Hovind debate, so you have to do something to stop yourself from pulling your hair out.
Yeah.
Um,
It's better than the take a shot every time they use this logical fallacy or something. At least you're staying sober the entire time.
Okay, but every Tuesday I do have a drinking game show where we watch creationist nonsense.
Oh God.
Yeah, it gets rough. It can be rough. This actually, speaking of which, this Tuesday should be Eric with Erica with Gutsick Gibbon. So
Oh
anyone
yeah.
here?
I love her stuff.
Yeah. So if anyone here is interested in that, we're going to be taking a look at some Eric Hovind nonsense and taking drinks while we do it. So she's usually got some White Claw, and I've usually got some kind of mixed drink. So, but back on topic though. So was there any particular line of reasoning or bits of evidence that were particularly influential in you leaving young Earth creationism?
I would have to, like, I can't pinpoint it, because there was just so much. So one thing that really got me, one other thing that really got me looking into it would be the worldwide flood, because I had started,
Hmm.
I wanted to read, like, as like a lot of Christians, a lot of people have not read the entire book cover to cover, and I wanted to read every single part of it, and I wanted to try to understand it and have a literal understanding of it. So I was reading in Genesis about the ark, and the dimensions of the ark, and how many square feet would have been inside the ark, and then I started thinking about the amount of species that we currently have. And at this time, I was sitting there thinking, okay, well, how could they have gotten all these animals on this ark? Like, if creationism is true, and the flood did happen, and the world is young, then that means, in my mindset at that time, I've heard arguments counter to this, and I'll touch on that. But my mindset at the time was, every kind of animal that was created, that is alive today, was a kind. It was, species were kinds at that point for me. So it was kind of, I was like, there's no way they could have fit all these animals on here. Well, then I started coming across arguments about that, because I started looking that up. I started going in and going to creationist websites, and like, okay, well, how could all these animals actually fit on this ark? Like, it doesn't make sense. And I came across, I can't remember if it was Ken Ham or another, like, ICR, what is it? Institute of Creationist Research. Yeah, ICR.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of them where they were talking about, well, not every species that's alive today was on the ark. It was actually something at the family level, and they diversified from there. And my mind, like, literally, it clicked. And I was sitting there thinking, well, isn't it a form of evolution? I mean,
Yeah.
if you have a cat kind, and you're saying that house cats and lions and jaguars are all the same, like, they all come from the same kind, then if I look at a dog, dogs have very similar features to cats, to felines. Yeah, there's
Mm-hmm.
slight differences, but it's not hard to imagine that they share a same kind as well.
Yeah.
And so that I started going down that rabbit hole, as it were. And so it wasn't, I can't pinpoint, it actually wasn't, it probably wouldn't be a argument from evolution. It would have been an argument from creationism, that actually, that the poor logic behind some of these arguments in creationism, that caused me to have the aha moment. Because, like I said, I mean, you've got, at the family level, these things diversifying. So now you got two of every kind of at the family level. So we've only got 7,000 animals total on the ark. Well, yeah, cool. So you're asking for rapid evolution at that point. Why not just why not just look at the evidence and go the whole way at that point?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and myself and a lot of other people have pointed out that the so-called creationist orchard that Ken Ham likes to talk about,
Hmm.
it's just the mainstream scientific cladogram, except you cut it off after a certain point arbitrarily, and
Exactly.
there's never a very good reason given as to why they cut it off there, and you look at like the kinds list, because my friend Gutsa Gibbon went to the Ark Encounter and handily actually took pictures and then typed into a Google Sheets document every single listed kind that they had on their plaque, because it's the only place it's published, which is
Right.
convenient, of course. You gotta pay the arm and a leg to get into the Ark to go see the kinds list. But then I looked at it and I'm like, almost all of this is they just took a taxon that ends in, DAE, which is the quote unquote family level. But the
Right.
thing is that what is a family is arbitrary. A
Right.
family is a group of similar genera.
Yep.
Okay, well, how similar? There is no answer. It's just like whatever the people in that field kind of feel like, that's what it counts as a family. And so, for an organization that spends so much time saying that they want to stand on God's word and not man's word, they then look at the admittedly arbitrary idea of putting things in families, and they're like, no, that corresponds exactly to what God did, obviously.
Right.
Your
Yeah.
arbitrary definition just happened to land right on what God was doing. Handy, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's just like,
Exactly.
what? And then other times they'll group absurdly large amounts of diversity. Like I was just looking at it yesterday, and I noticed that Psittaciformes was in there, which is like 4 or 5 different families of parrots and parrot-like organisms.
Right.
And it's all just because people look at them and say, "Oh, that's a parrot."
Yeah.
Because in a few places they try to squeeze in extra like diversity because people look at it and they're like, "I would use the same word for all of those animals." I'm like, "Well, must be a kind then." It's like,
Right.
No.
Yeah.
That's not how science works, guys.
And that's what I didn't. So I was actually on Answers in Genesis probably about a month ago, looking up because Georgia Purdom, I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Ken Ham's daughter. She
Wait,
had
hold on. Georgia is Ken Ham's daughter?
yeah. From what I heard.
If that's true, I had not heard that before.
Yeah. I'd like to. I think so. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Keep going. We'll investigate.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. But anyways, she had a talk right whenever COVID kicked off, and she was doing this talk that she streamed live on YouTube, and I was watching it, and she was talking about kinds of animals. So I was like, okay, so what does Answers in Genesis describe as a kind of animal? And I got in to the weeds, and I looked up what is a bird kind. Well, it turns out they believe that there's something like 36 different bird kinds.
Mm-hmm.
That it wasn't just one bird kind. And it's like, okay, so you guys say that we have a cat kind and everything comes from that one cat kind. Well, now why do we have 37 bird kinds? And I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, when Noah was on the ark, he released 2 types of birds. He released a dove and he released, I think it was a sparrow. So you're kind of stuck at that point. You've got to say that there were there were different bird kinds because he had different kinds of birds on the ark at that point.
Yeah, how can he release 2 identifiably different birds if all he has is one mating pair of birds?
Right, yeah.
Or maybe 7 pairs of birds if birds count as clean as a group, which they don't, but whatever.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting. And so it was noticing that there was this weird arbitrariness to the kinds that they were talking about, because I do think that the kinds thing does go a bit of ways towards solving the space problem.
Oh yeah.
Which is why I very rarely talk about the idea that there's not enough space, unless we're talking about specifics, like when Answers in Genesis says like, oh well, there were 5 kinds of proboscideans, which are elephants and elephant-like animals. It's like, well, hey, hold up there, because if you're trying to take care of 10 proboscideans for a year, and you have to take on all their food on board beforehand and all their water beforehand, because you're not going to be able to drink that water off the side of the ship.
Yeah.
We've got some problems here. But for the most part, that's just like, okay, fine. You have... But then for me, the question then comes in, well, we know that by the time the Egyptians come around and start writing, that they have identifiably modern amounts of biodiversity in their area, right? Because they're drawing... hawks and owls and sparrows and chickens and dogs and jackals not the same as dogs, and lions is not identifiably lions, not just some generic cat thing. And they also have domesticated cats. And we know that like ancient Mediterranean cultures were whaling, so we know that whales were around by the time, and we can correlate that to like, so by the time Abraham happens, we got our modern diversity.
Yep.
How did you get that from these kinds in what has to be no more than a few hundred years?
Yeah, I mean, I sat down and I did I think a couple of people actually did the math, but I wanted to do it for myself. And I think it came out to be that if we did have like roughly, I think they said their worst case scenario was 7,000 different kinds of animals on the ark. If you did that, then we would expect to find 1 to 2 new species from every family of animals every single day up until now to reach the diversity of land animals that we have today.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just, you don't have enough generations to get that much genetic diversity. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah. Actually, a friend of mine, Walker, who is just a walking fish on YouTube, did that math for a collab he did with Gutsa Gibbon about the proboscideans. And he found that basically, on average, every single pregnancy would have to result in a new species.
Yeah.
For every single proboscidean for over 100 years, because their generation time is so long.
Yeah, it's like these simple things that you have these ideas that organizations like Answers in Genesis puts out, and it like if you don't think about it for more than a second, then it's like, oh well, that's a good argument. But then if you literally just sit there and do the math, it's like, well, there's a lot of problems with this. Either we still have new species like popping out every time something gives birth, which would give credence to the whole wrong idea about an ape giving birth to a human.
Hmm.
But either that's happening or there was like extremely rapid evolution the days after the
Right.
flood.
And also, another thing that I find odd about the kinds list is that many of the kinds contain far more diversity than the great apes,
Yeah,
including humans, and yet humans will get excluded. So they'll say, lions and tigers, who among alignable sequences come out as about 95% similar, same
right.
kind. Humans and
Yep.
chimpanzees, who in alignable sequences come out at more than 98% similar, nah, totally not the
Yep.
same thing.
Yep. I actually just put up a tweet about that, and it's interesting to me because you can do the same thing with mice and rats. People will, if you ask the average Joe or a creationist if mice and rats are the same kind, well, mice and rats actually share less in common than bonobos and humans do.
Actually, I
Uh,
have the
the,
kinds list open. Let's check it out. Let's see if AIG lists them in the same kind. So we're gonna go to, let's see, amphibians. No, where'd mammals go? It's a long list. Sorry, reptiles.
you're good.
Let's see, living reptiles. Thanks, AIG. Synapsids, mammals. Okay, so they're not clean. So we gotta get out of it. Clean mammals. Let's see. My goodness, just a long list. Okay, mammals living. Folivora, Ursidae, Suoidea, Pongidae, which is interesting that they're going with Suoidea, which is larger than the family, but whatever. Hyena, Canidae, Equidae, Rhinoceratidae, Ornithodelphidae, Macroelephantidae. Yep, Muridae. They have rats. So Muridae is the family of rats and mice,
Yep.
and they do have them listed as a single kind.
Yeah. And they have, I mean, if they literally, if you follow logic and they are the same kind, then we and chimpanzees are the same kind.
Yeah, yeah. There's far more genetic diversity in Muridae than there is in Hominidae,
Yeah.
which is the family which, although, so the Ark Encounter likes to put the great apes into the now defunct family of Pongidae.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, they're still using that term, which, as far as I know, fell out of favor in like the mid '90s.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a while now.
Yeah, when I was learning taxonomy at first as a kid, because I was a weird kid who liked to learn taxonomy for fun. Um, Pongidae was still being used, and Hominidae was restricted to what we would now call hominins.
Hmm.
So, but then again, that just goes to show like the words ending in ide are arbitrary, right?
Yep.
Like, is Miridae and Hominidae the same kind of family? Like, are they at the same rank? No,
Right.
it's completely arbitrary where you draw the line between a family and an order and a class. Like,
Yeah. These are classifications we as humans have come up with. I mean,
right.
technically, if you, I mean, I've talked to scientists before, and actually, my advisor was sitting there talking to her, and technically, species don't exist. We just arbitrarily create these. Not arbitrarily. There's reasons. There's justifications behind it,
Right.
but these are boundaries that we humans have put on to explain the different looks between animals and plants. But I mean, yeah, it's I don't know.
So the other section that I like to have for these is about how it went after you left, because for a lot of people they have a lot of friends or family who are or were young Earth creationists, and this can cause strain in like those relationships. So, was there any trouble after you left? Did you wait a while to tell people? Did anyone cut off ties?
I was worried about that. But okay, so my my mother actually gave she gave up her she at this point in my life, my mom was she would have called herself spiritual. She believed in God, but she was no longer She knew that the Bible had been written by man, and she had become, I guess you would call her an extremely liberal Christian at that point with her views.
Okay.
Um, so she didn't hold any of these younger creationists views. She didn't accept evolution because she didn't really ever think about it. She just didn't care
Right.
about those kind of aspects. So she was the first person I was like, hey, so I've looked into this, and creationism, like the world's much older than that. And she's like, okay. So she's just okay, yeah, she's fine.
Yeah.
And I knew dad wouldn't have a problem with it because my dad had they had been out of the church for a while. It was really only their sons, us, that had held on to these views as long as we did. And so yeah, I was afraid that I would experience that, but I didn't. Um, the only negative experience I had out of it was that I had two of my brothers. I got a brother that's a preacher, and he is a last I talked to him, he's a young Earth creationist. Um, but my other brother, he is a young Earth creationist. He's devoutly religious, devoutly fundamentalist, and both of them kind of stopped talking to me for a while. And then when I started dating my wife at the time, my brother, not the preacher, the one that's fundamentalist, he called me up, and he actually uh, first time I've talked to him about 8 months, I think it was at that point. He calls me up and asked me to please not share my ideas with my at the time girlfriend, because I could be depriving her of a place in heaven. And I got
Wow.
irritated. It was a really really strange conversation. But after that, there was never any really negative consequences. My grandparents, they don't like it. They pretend that that subject doesn't exist. But they also, yeah, so they avoid that subject. Actually, interesting story.
Specifically, creationism and the age of the Earth.
No, so if anything, like so that's what I was going to say is like with COVID, like we talk about COVID, we talk about how it adapts when we get these new variants and stuff. And I talk about like we'll be sitting there and she's like, yeah, a new variant comes around. And I try to explain to her how that works. The subject of adaptation comes up, and I try not to
Hmm.
touch. I try not to use the E word, the
Right.
evolution word around her, because I don't want to shut down the conversation. But as soon as that gets brought up, she has to. She'll bring up something like, well, God's got control over it, or something biblical will get brought up to try to bring the conversation away from adaptation and evolution. Um, and actually, my parents bought my grandparents a DNA test kit. So I think it was I think it was Net Geo's, because Net Geo was doing one for a while. And they knew that I had a background in evolutionary biology, and I also was had just started my PhD, so they wanted me to come over and try to explain what these results were. So we pulled it up, and it showed the map of their haploid groups that had migrated out of Africa and on up into
Hmm.
Canada and all this, and well, into the United States and all across the world and all that. And Mamaw, she looks and she says, I just don't understand. Why do they have us coming out of Africa? Adam and Eve were created somewhere near Israel. She's like, if anything, we should be migrating out of Israel. And I'm like, but no, that's not the case. And I was trying to figure out a way to talk to her about it. And
Yeah.
she's like, and I just don't understand why they don't have Adam and Eve on here. Scientists have proven that you've got Adam and Eve. What was it? They call her mitochondrial Eve. And I'm like, that's
Uh,
not how that works. So
no.
so I try to I want to try when I talk about these things when it comes to evolution or adaptation. I don't want the person to think that I'm attacking their religious beliefs, because I'm not at all.
Right.
Um, I want them to. Uh, I don't care if they change their religious beliefs at all. I want people to try to understand what science is saying, the facts of science. So yeah, so when it comes to talk, but yeah, so long story short, I'm rambling now. No, there was no negative consequences, but I do know people that have come out to their family and talked about, yeah, I was a young Earth creationist, but now I accept evolution, and it was nearly as bad. I won't say as bad, but it's nearly as bad as coming out and saying, "Hey, mom, I'm I'm no longer straight.
Yeah. I've also talked to people who've had pretty negative experiences with that. And that's, you know, it's one of the reasons I do this is so that for those people who are in that circumstance, you can see like, hey man, you aren't alone with this. There are other people
Right.
who've gone through it. That's one of the reasons why I want to have these stories out there. Because it's important for people in that position to know that they aren't alone. There are other
Right.
people who have had to deal with this, and I'm glad that it did not go over very poorly for you. It also seems like by this time you didn't have a strong church community that you were in. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. So I was in and out of church because at that point in time I had saw corruption in most of the churches I was going to, and
Mm-hmm.
at that point in time I lived by, I can't remember the verse. Somebody in the chat will probably know what it is, but uh, Jesus said, "Where two or more gathered, there I am." So my church was me going and talking to people about beliefs, about what their beliefs were, what my beliefs were, why I
Mm-hmm.
believed what I believed. So I was so yeah, that was my version of church. But I would attend, like, when I remember when I was deployed in the UAE, and we had a church service there, and I used to go to church service there and talk to the people around all around there. But yeah, so I didn't have a church family because for me, church was anytime where two or more were gathered in His name, it was church to me.
Okay. Now, do you think that made it easier for you to leave young Earth creationism?
No, because for 3 years, from the time I was 23 until I was 26, I was in sheer depression. Like, there were nights that I would
Okay.
literally cry myself to sleep, begging God to take these thoughts about evolution being true out of my head because I didn't want to burn in hell.
Right.
And it actually took, I can't remember what the channel was or who it was that said it, but there was a YouTube video I was watching, and the person there was somebody that called in with the same crisis, and they said, "You believe that this God uh, gave you this brain. You believe that this God is all knowing, all loving, all powerful, and He gave you this brain to think with. And do you really think that this God is going to condemn you for using this brain to think about these questions? And would a loving God do that?" And the person said no. And like when I heard that, I was like, "Holy crap!" And they gave me all the permission in the world, like at that point, to just question and look and investigate. But up until that point, that was about 2.5 years into my I don't know what you would call it, but into questioning, into looking into evolution. And um, but yeah, for 3 solid years, it there was nothing easy about it at all. So no,
Okay.
it didn't make it easier on me at all.
Okay. Um, what is it that helped you get past that? Because I'm assuming that you're not currently in that situation where it's a huge emotional drain on your life to be not a creationist anymore.
It takes a while. So even after I turned after I accepted evolution, and I had actually I said that I was comfortable saying that I was no longer a creationist.
Hmm.
There were still thoughts in my head. There were still thoughts in my head like, "Oh crap, what if I'm wrong? Is this something I can get condemned in hell?" Because at this point, I mean, I was still devoutly religious at this point, and it was just but I still had these questions coming up. I actually went to a chaplain probably about 2 years into my searching, um, and I was literally like, I wanted to talk to somebody, so I sat down with him and talked to him about it, and I was just like, I've been raised creationist my entire life, and it just seems like it. What about the? And I asked him about the original sin problem and these kind of things, and he said, at the end of the day, what does it really matter whether or not this God created through evolution or through creationism? All that matters is that you live a good life and all yada yada yada. Um, so but the thing that so yeah, it was a while before I was able, even after I accepted the science, it was a while before I all those thoughts were um subdued, I guess. Like I mean, obviously, I don't have that problem now. There's no crisis. There's no anything like that. All I want to
Right.
do is now I just want to do science communication. I want to try to get out there and help people understand how science works.
Okay.
But yeah, so it was a process.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that that did not persist because that would not be a way to live your life.
Mm-mm.
Um, okay. And you said that was about a 3 month process?
No, three
Oh, 3
years.
years. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
this was a 3-year process from the time I was 23 until I was 26.
Okay.
And then 2 years later is when I signed my. They were doing a force shaping in the Air Force, so they needed to get people out. And I was like, "Hey, I want to go to school now. I want because I had studied so much about evolution that I was finding that in my free time, I was looking up documentaries and I was reading scientific papers, and I wanted to know as much as I possibly could. And I was talking to my friends about it at my unit, and they were like, "Why don't you just go to school for it?" And I was like, that's a great idea. And it just so happened to coincide when they were doing force shaping and
Right.
they would, anybody that volunteered to get out, they would pay you a bonus. I was like, yeah, I'll go back to school.
Yeah.
But 28 years old, I got out and went to University of Tennessee and studied ecology and evolutionary biology.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I also got out only a few months early, but it was near the end of like a fiscal quarter, so the Navy was like, "Hey, you could just get out like right now, and
Yeah.
we can write this amount of money off of our budget for this quarter, even though you would have been out like just after anyway, but still
Yep.
it counts as a cut from our budget." I'm like, "All right, sure, whatever, I don't care." Um,
Yep.
yeah, they do that sometimes. Which I mean, hey, it can help.
Yeah. It did me
um,
because I still had, I think I had still had like 2 years on my contract at that point.
oh wow, that's a big that I did
Yeah.
not get out too early, 2 years early.
Yeah, yeah. So I had 2 years of my contract left, and basically the deal was they would pay uh, you your all the money you would make up to that 2 years in one lump sum. Granted, it would be taxed. So I was like,
Right.
yeah, I'll do that and go to school. Why not?
Man, that yeah, I would have done that too. I would have done that in a heartbeat. Um, well, so I was a nuclear technician, and nuclear technicians don't like being in the Navy. They all hate it. Well, I guess that's not entirely true. Some of them like it, but there are also usually um, some of the worst people there. So
Yeah.
which then perpetuates it because you get leadership by attrition, and only the people who really shouldn't be in positions of power are the ones who stay, and then they end up in positions of power simply because they're the only ones who are senior enough. So
Right.
yeah, the Navy really needs to work on that, or at least they did 10 years ago. Maybe they fixed it. I doubt it, but
Yeah.
um, all right. So we're gonna be starting up the Q&A pretty soon, and I want to go through how the Q&A works. So first, make sure that you tag me at Dapper Dinosaur with your question. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I'll see it. Also, if your question comes in as a super chat, we do prioritize those first. The Q&A session will last about a half an hour, and then that'll be it for the stream. So if you have questions, start thinking about them. And like I said, if you have questions you really definitely want answered, you can super chat and they will go to the top of the stack. But otherwise, I will ask them essentially in the order that I get them. But yes, if you don't tag me, there's a very high chance that I will skip over them. And I know that I've seen at least one or two questions already in the chat earlier, which I've said, hold towards the end. But before we get to that, is there any last words that you want to put in there before we get to questions and answers?
Oh no. I'm ready to answer some questions. If anybody has any.
All right. So, and remember, as I've said, this is leaving Young Earth creationism and not leaving religion or Christianity. So you can say as much or as little as you want about any current religious stance that doesn't contradict with, Young Earth creation or with science.
Yep.
So let me take a look. And I'll say before, because there's always a delay. So after this, guys, I will be on the Non Sequitur show talking about nuclear reactors and nuclear accidents and things like that, nuclear disasters. So that'll be at 5 Pacific, 6 Mountain, 7 Central, 8 Eastern. If you're in Europe or Hawaii or something like that, sorry, you're just gonna have to do math on your own. um, so I do want to remind people it is Dapper Dinosaur. Dapper Dino will not highlight for me, but I did catch this one. This is from Gregory Burlington, who is a young Earth creationist. Does TJ know that NASA means to deceive in Hebrew and that evolution means to lie in Latin? He shouldn't have left YEC because evolution is evil.
Interesting.
Yeah. So spoiler alerts: NASA does not mean to lie in Hebrew. Evolution does not mean to lie in Latin. And yeah, there you go. I don't have any position on evil as such. JS says, "Is TJ still a Christian?" And again, you may choose or may not answer.
I'll put it this way. My wife and I are active members in the Unitarian Universalist Church.
Okay. There you go. So, yeah, sorry, we've had a young Earth creationist who also apparently is a flat earther dropping by lately, and he likes to get timed out every once in a while for doing things like ad hom attacks or going wildly off topic or things like that.
You should check out my YouTube channel when I actually get it going, because I'm going to address some of those.
Yes. When that does happen, do send me that link, because then I will, add it to the description. So if someone is watching this in the future, first, hello from the past. Second, check the description, because by this point, TJ's YouTube channel may be up and running. This is from our creationist friend again. Do you know that the Acambro figures, or do you know about the Acambro figures that quote unquote disprove evolution?
Are those the figures on the rocks?
No, those are the Icastones.
Okay.
The Acambro figurines are little gold figurines of animals, and some people who don't know what dinosaurs look like think some of them look like dinosaurs.
Okay.
That's basically what that comes down to. Is people who don't know about dinosaurs think some of them look like dinosaurs.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's. Oh, but we did get a question about the Icastones.
Oh, did we?
Oh, yeah, we did. So, do you have anything to say about the Icastones?
Most of them have been faked. Most of them are. They literally, from what I understand, they go out and they say, "Hey, if you find any of these things, any of these stones, bring them to us, and we'll pay you for them." So now people have an incentive to construct these stones and bring them and say, "Hey, we found these. This demonstrates your idea of dinosaurs." But every dinosaur depiction I've seen on there, I don't know. It doesn't look like a dinosaur, and it's also been demonstrated to be forgeries.
Yeah.
There are some of them, I think, that are real, but they have like animals that are of like today, or like whenever the original stones were carved.
Right. There are, you're right. There are some that have actually been demonstrated to be real artifacts, but those are the ones that don't have dinosaurs and don't have people performing brain surgery. And and the dinosaurs that are on the Icastones are wildly inaccurate.
Yep.
So it's odd. And we got one more from our creationist friend, but then we do have one from someone who is not one of our creationist friends. Did you know that the Bible mentions that there is a dome on a flat Earth?
Awesome.
Okay, there we go. So
demonstrate the dome.
Well, the Venerable Bede says, "Where are you doing your research? An actual subduction zone?"
So I'm actually we've collected samples from Costa Rica. Those samples were collected before I went into came into the program. But we've also went to Chile, Argentina, and Iceland, and collected hot spring samples. So what we want to do is we want to try to study these deep subsurface biomes. One of the problems with that is usually the way you do that is you go out and you dig a core. You dig deep into the earth and pull up the water from these deep aquifers. But we wanted to try to be, number one, it's really expensive to bring a drill out in the jungle with you in Costa Rica or up in to Chile or Argentina and drag this thing around with you and dig holes. And so what's a more passive way of doing this? One more passive way is to find where the fluid is upwelling through the hot spring, stick a pipe down in there and pull up water samples from this upwelling water, and then collect sediments from around the where this water is coming from. So you're collecting sediments and fluids, and we wanted to know, can we parse apart shallow subsurface community that lives in the surface springs from the community that's upwelling from this fluid from deep below the surface.
Okay.
So that's what my research is in. The samples I have are in Costa Rica, Chile, Argentina, and we also have a project in Iceland. And I'm currently at University of Tennessee.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. And how is that research going? Are you finding that you can distinguish between these communities easily,
Yeah,
or?
it's really cool. I'm working on my manuscript now. We just sent it out to the co-authors, and they've sent back the revisions. Before I got on here, I was actually finalizing some of the figures for it. We were able to use some statistical analysis to and look at using statistical analysis. We could find organisms that correlate with each other and that are only found in specific locations of the subduction zone versus some that are found everywhere or in most locations. So it looks as if you have a community that's specific to certain zones and a community that's diffuse. So that kind of just that one piece of evidence kind of suggests, well, the ones that are specific to zones may be coming from the deep subsurface, whereas the ones that are diffuse are wind blown, they're brought in by dirt and these kind of things. And then we can start looking at their genomes because I don't just look at like 16S is what a lot of people use for microbial research to identify these microbes, but we're not just doing 16S. We're actually sequencing the entire genome of the entire
Wow.
community and creating metagenomic assembled genomes. We can look at their genes, their carbon fixation pathways, their metabolic pathways, all this.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Awesome. All right. Let's see. So Gregory again asked a question, but it's too dumb. I'm not going to read it. JS says thoughts on biologos.
Oh, so I actually really like biologos. So I told you my brother's a preacher, and he has kids that will like he's a youth minister preacher, and he has members of his youth ministry that will have these crisis of faith, I guess. And like I said, I don't want anyone. I don't want people to think that there has to be a division between their religious beliefs and what science says because there doesn't have to be. You got good scientists like Francis Collins and other scientists who are devoutly Christian and accept evolution. So I actually sent my brother the link for BioLogos, and I think they actually do a lot of good. Um, and I mean, I haven't heard anything negative. If anybody's heard anything negative, please let me know. But
The only
uh,
negative thing I hear is from young Earth creationists, or sometimes
yeah,
from like old Earth creationists.
yeah, no, I really like I disagree with a lot of their conclusions, a lot of their ideas on BioLogos, but where it comes in with the science. I find it from what I've read and some of the podcasts I've listened to from them. The science is pretty sound. Where it comes to scientific aspects, where it comes to theological aspects, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Now, this is a question from our creationist friend Gregory that I actually do think is an interesting one. So how do you know that organisms evolved over supposed millions of years when you weren't there? So what is some of the evidence that we use to demonstrate that organisms did in fact evolve?
I mean, you can look at it depends on what your organism you're talking about. You can look at what strata the fossil was found in, but of course, he might come back and he might say, "Well, aren't fossils dated based on the strata, and the strata dated based on the fossils?" And that's a complete misunderstanding of how that's done. We can also look at you can look at the um, so we can take the human and chimpanzee genomes and we can look at mutations, like differences in these genomes, and we know how often these point mutations happen, and you can reverse calculate back how. But you got this accumulation of these point mutations or these different types of mutations, these insertions, and we have an idea of the rate that these happen at. So you can calculate back and look at that. You can also look at fossils throughout time. Like you can look at all the hominids and see that you can visually see the adaptations, the changes that they're experiencing through time. The evidence is astronomical. I mean, you just go in and start reading some of the papers. I mean, there's the science papers can be hard and intimidating to read, But focus on the abstract, focus on the conclusions, and if you really want to know how they got in and reached their conclusions, look at the methodology.
Creationism says, how do you distinguish that characteristic fossils are not just animals unique to this place, but necessarily represent some specific time? I'm not entirely sure what he means by that.
I'm not either. Let me see if I can. I don't even see the question.
You might have to scroll up a little bit in the chat. If it's a question about how do we know if something is a good index fossil, one of the ways that we can tell if something is a good index fossil is if you can see a relatively low amount of morphological diversity in the organism in question, but also a very wide geographical extent in a narrow time band. That's basically what index fossils are widespread geographically, but restricted in time and relatively similar so that you can identify them across that geological or geographical extent. So if that's
what he's asking, yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure.
Can you if you can hear me, can you rephrase the question and ask again, please?
He also asks, is it true that the ratio between single mutation, I believe he means point mutation, and indels are 25-1, and that this match proves the common ancestry? I don't know if that's true.
I don't know that answer.
Yeah. You might check with Creation Myths, Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal. He's a evolutionary biologist who's a geneticist. He might have a better handle on that. Because
that's one thing I will say. While I do have my undergrad is in evolutionary biology and ecology, I'm going to be well more qualified to talk about geomicrobiology or microbes living in the environment. So questions like that are great, but I may not have an answer for them.
Okay. So this is from our creationist friend, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. What do you think about the discovery of dinosaur soft tissue, which, I mean, we started discovering that in the last, 10 or so years?
That is, I think it's actually a really, really cool find. But your conclusion that it disproves evolution is absolutely wrong. Listen to Schweitzer herself. Read any of the papers written on it. There is a clear reason why these soft tissues were found, and I think some of them even turned out not to be soft tissues, but don't quote me on that.
Okay. Creationism asks another question, but I'm not sure what he means by it. He says, okay, but you make the presupposition that I think he means fossils from one time period. I don't
really understand your question.
Yeah, sorry, Creo. I really have no idea what you're trying to go for there. I'm not going to ask about whether or not you are mistaken, whether or not you believe the mistaken idea that the word globe means deception in Swahili when it in fact does not.
I think we got a troll.
Yeah, I think so too. But you know what? It's the kind of troll who sometimes is fun for the audience to poke at. So it's okay. He did get a timeout for using an ad hom though. Don't use ad homs. Insults aren't ad homs though, guys. So that is something that came up in the chat. I want to make it clear. We're not big fans of ad homs here. Nor are we a fan of actual bigotry and things like that. So do be careful with your insults. But an ad hom doesn't even have to be insulting. It just means that you say the person who makes an argument has some fact about them that's not related to the argument, but therefore you shouldn't believe the argument. So for instance, if I said, well, TJ might have all these ideas about evolution, but clearly he's too nice of a guy, and so he's not into the real arguments, so we can't believe him. That's not an insult. It's still an ad hom. So the ad hom in question in the chat was Darwin was racist, therefore we shouldn't believe him. Even if it were true that Darwin were racist, that wouldn't make him wrong. And also, I don't believe much of what Darwin said because he was wrong about a lot of things.
Yeah, and then you also, imagine all the religious leaders that were racist back then.
Yeah,
so shouldn't listen to them either.
By our current standards, it would be virtually impossible to find someone who wouldn't be considered racist today.
Exactly.
Interestingly, though, Darwin was a long-standing abolitionist before it was popular to be an abolitionist, as was his family, and he had about as progressive a view on race as you could possibly have, being
At
an
that time.
Englishman, in the 19th century.
But compared to today, yes, he had some racist ideas.
Yeah. Let's
So
see.
I'm trying.
Dragon Legends. Even if Dragon Legends were about dinosaurs, that wouldn't show that they didn't live millions of years ago. It would just show that they did live recently, which is not. Evolution
That was
doesn't.
actually a belief I actually held for a
Oh,
while.
was it?
Yeah, I actually believed that it was for a short period of time that dinosaurs were dragons. That's what
Okay.
people were calling dragons.
I think the closest I'd come to entertaining that is that some dragon legends could have sprung up after people found and misinterpreted dinosaur fossils.
Yeah.
I find that to be fairly reasonable.
Yeah, the whole you've heard the argument before, the what is it in the Bible, the not behemoth but the Leviathan, both of them. So both of those for me at that point in time were obviously dragons, but then you actually look into what they're describing. It was not. It was likely the behemoth was likely a elephant or some large animal of that nature, and then Leviathan itself was probably an exaggeration of a crocodile.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And like I said, if you wanted to make the argument that maybe someone found, like, I don't know, like a Spinosaurus skeleton and that was their basis for Leviathan, I'll just say, like, sure, maybe.
Yeah, the people were finding fossils back then.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
And so, like, that's the closest that'll come there. But the odd thing about that argument for me is that even if it's 100% true, it doesn't actually do anything with evolution, because the thing about evolution is it doesn't predict that certain groups have to go extinct after a certain amount of time.
Yep.
So, like...
Yeah, I mean, the coelacanth's an example of that. Coelacanth, if you look at it, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. If you look at it superficially on the outside, it looks exactly the same as it did millions of years ago, or as its ancestors did. But you can look at it on a genetic level, and it's adapted, it's changed, it's evolved.
Yeah. JS says, have you seen the Ken Ham versus Bill Nye debate?
Yes, and I was excited for it. That's something me and Dapper talked about before. But I was excited about it. And then when I watched it, it was Bill Nye did great, but everybody in that audience had already had their mind made up before the debate ever started. And I don't know that it did any good. All it did, I mean, afterwards, Ken Ham was able to afford to create his Ark encounter, which I would actually like to go look at. I just don't feel like paying the $50 to go into it.
My recommendation is, instead of going and actually going to the Ark encounter, just watch one of the various videos. I would recommend my friend Gutsick Gibbons' video about it. So it's recently, I think, broke 200,000 views or something.
Yeah, isn't she? She's a grad student in anthropology and human biology or something.
She's a postgrad in primatology.
Okay.
Yep. She's currently working on her PhD in primatology.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, sure. Her master's thesis was accepted, I think, a few months ago, and so she's since gone on to her postgrad studies.
So she did the route where you go master's and then PhD. The route that they tend to go with, at least in this department, is you sign up and you go from bachelor's and then you work your way through the PhD.
Okay. Let's see. Addicted to Mosh says, did you know that Burlington means nonsense in Klingon? I did not know that, but that makes sense to me. That checks out.
Yep.
I'll buy that.
I'll go with that.
I'm now actually going through and seeing, is that even a valid, like, for syllable structure? Yeah. I mean, technically, yeah. I guess so. Okay, yep. Anyway, let's see. Gregory is here to tell us that he's here to warn us. So be warned. You've now been warned. And the Jord, yes, I can contact you afterwards. Let's see. Where were we? JS points out that Trey the Explainer and Ben Stanhope have done some good stuff against the Dragon Legends. I agree, they have. I've also done a fair bit. You can find a few videos of mine about our dragons, dinosaurs, and I also touched on it when I was talking about Cindy Lincoln, who was Kent Hovind's ex, who he was convicted of body slamming.
Yep.
Oh, and Joel
I've
Duff
seen a
is
couple
here.
of interviews.
Everyone, if you haven't looked at Joel Duff's channel, you really should. It's got a lot of really good stuff. He does it This Week in Creationism, where he takes a look at some of the headlines and whatnot that have come out from creationist websites and things like that. And he takes a look at that, and he keeps track of sort of the trends in creationist thought. Great stuff. Go check him out. Let's see. Tesla Ranger points out that elephant skulls were mistaken for Cyclops because of the big eye sockets in the middle. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that where people have misinterpreted ancient bones. In fact, interestingly, one of the first confirmed dinosaur fossils that we know of from Europe was at first interpreted as a petrified giant scrotum.
Oh yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen that.
Yeah. And then eventually some anatomists
Like
came by and they were like,
or something like that.
yeah. And some anatomist comes by eventually and they're like, I don't think that's what that is, guys.
But on the dragon thing, I don't know, it's been years ago, but there was actually a really good mockumentary that was put out, mockumentary, not documentary.
Right.
Mockumentary is put out by Discovery Channel on the scientists that discover a frozen corpse of a dragon, and they talk about the evolution, how this dragon would have been able to breathe fire or anything like that. It's really, really good. I thought I liked it.
So Lord Dissident says, doesn't that idea kick against human creativity and imagination? I'm not exactly sure which idea, but if it's the idea that dragon legends were based on fossils, then I don't really think it is a knock against human creativity. I mean,
No. So I'm sorry, Dono. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, like, people get inspiration from things. That's just how humans work.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you sit there and you try to think about an alien creature on another planet that doesn't have any characteristics of anything that you're familiar with in the world. You can't do it. You can't come up with an animal that does not have a characteristic, like a characteristic that is not currently known to you. So dragon legends, I think, are smorgasbords of or a combination of many different creatures that people lived around and possibly influenced by fossils they found. Like literally, that's why most of the aliens that we see in sci-fi look like humanoids, or
Well,
you'll
that
get
and
some-
budgetary restrictions.
well, yeah, that too. But even looking at Arrival, the sci-fi Arrival, which had very alien aliens,
Mhm.
they still look like
Cephalopods, basically.
cephalopods. That's the word I was looking for. They still look like cephalopods. So it's people's imaginations are built by their experiences.
Yeah, I really do agree. Although I will say that in recent years there has been some trends in sort of like the speculative evolution and artist community to try to make aliens that, while they are constrained by the limits of physics and chemistry, are not so overtly based on Earth-based organisms. And so,
Yeah.
you get to some conclusions like, hey, legs are probably going to have to be a thing if you come on land because you're not going to get around it at any appreciable speed without some kind of leg-like appendage, but they don't have to be built like the legs of Earth animals. And,
Right.
all sorts of different, like, things like mouth parts or what kinds of senses might develop, things like that. So,
Yeah, it's like I mean, you look at but even with life on Earth, I think the eyeball has evolved 5 different times. So there are going to be characteristics that are, if there is life out there elsewhere, which I kind of think that there, with all the planets and stuff, exoplanets we're finding, I would be pretty remiss. I'd be pretty, there's more chance there is something out there than there's not. But this life that we do experience is probably going to have some characteristics that we have here on Earth.
yeah, I mean, physics is physics and chemistry is chemistry, right? Like, there's
Yep.
a constrained limit of, like, options that are available. And sure,
Mhm.
as humans, we probably don't know what all of those options are, but we do
Right.
know that some things are outside of them, right?
Yep.
So, like, we're probably never going to come across an animal that has, like, the biological ability to time travel, because it's probably not in the realm of possibility.
Right.
So let's see. This is from Gregory. It's just, if we evolved from monkeys, and why are there still monkeys? Because that's how evolution works, buddy. That's literally
That's
a
like
prediction
saying
of evolution.
If you came from your aunt, then why do you still have cousins?
I think you mean grandma.
Yeah, there, you know what I mean. If you
Yeah.
came from your grandma, if you come from your great great grandma, if you share a lineage with your grandma, then why do you still have cousins?
Right. And the George said that, oh, apparently I got a shout out from Emma Thorne's channel. I did not know that. Well, thank you, Emma. I'll have to thank her after I check that out, because I was not aware. I am in a Twitter DM group with her, and I think, yeah, we've spoken a little bit, not very much though. Rainy Thorsday says, have you made sure to run all of this dragon and alien stuff by Ken Ham? He might have a lot to say. He does have a lot to say.
There was an interview with him, a video I watched where somebody asked him, like, if we did show that there were aliens, like intelligent aliens. He said that they would literally be demons, is what he said they would be.
Yeah,
that they would not.
That's a surprisingly common take in young Earth creationist circles, is that either UFOs and aliens aren't real, or if they were, they would be demons. Or I've heard some of them say that, oh no, these are actually like satanic apparitions that are coming from hell or something. And I'm just like,
right.
Okay. I mean, that's not the take I would go with. I don't think you have to go at that from that angle, even if you're a Christian, but I guess that's really where you want to go. The first time I think I encountered that was with John Morris Pendleton. The guy who lives in Mexico and who makes those really, really bad, or made those really, really bad like creationist VHS tapes, some of which have been uploaded to YouTube. And
the one that Logic talks about.
Yeah, Logic it was one of his very early series, was about it was called Hello, I'm a Scientist.
Yeah.
And that's what brought that to my attention, and I've looked further into it, and I'm like, yeah, it's actually a surprisingly like common response to the idea of UFOs from creationists. Is like, oh yeah, it's Satan.
Yeah,
it's just like,
it's of the devil.
Okay, I mean, I guess.
But the reason they would have to say that is because the among creationist circles, we were God's perfect creation, so He wouldn't have created other things out there. And if I've also heard it said that if there is alien life out there, they won't have souls. Only we have souls, is what they said. So I was like, okay.
Which is interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so you can have an intelligent race out there of intelligent creatures, but they have no souls. So, okay, whatever.
So let's see. Oh, can you explain how Piltdown Man disproves evolution? I could quickly say it doesn't.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
Done.
So we'll talk about what Piltdown Man is real quick. So Piltdown Man was a hoax, right?
Forgery. Yep. It was a forgery, and it was put away for a long time, and it was never really, I don't think it was ever really pushed. And it took other scientists that came forward and said, look, this is a forgery. It wasn't a creationist that came forward. It was legitimate scientists that said, we believe this is a forgery, and here's why.
Yeah. Let's see. And the George said that Atheist Jr. mentioned me in her last video. Oh, well, I'll have to thank him for that. I do talk to Atheist Jr. fairly often. Let's see. Sea level isn't flat, so that doesn't disprove the globe. That's fast. Addicted to Mosh says, can TJ think of an alternative of evolution for these other planets? I'm not sure what he means by that.
And is he asking an alternative to evolution on other planets?
Maybe. Maybe. I think so.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm just trying to parse out what I think the question is.
Alternative to evolution. No. Okay. So I'm guessing I'm going to interpret this as: is there an alternative way that life can come about other than evolution on other planets? And I would think not, because that would be like to me reading that would be like, can you think of another chemical process that doesn't involve chemicals?
Yeah, I think at some point there's going to have to be evolution, but I guess you could think of something like maybe panspermia, which would mean that life didn't evolve on that planet, but it did arrive there from somewhere else where it did evolve.
Right, but it still hasn't. Its origin still is in evolution.
I think the closest I could get is maybe you could come up with an idea where like someone seeded unintentionally like genetically designed organism onto a planet. And so, like, you have a synthetic life form that some technologically advanced species, but ultimately
That's actually I'm actually kind of wrong about that. So because your statement right there actually made So we could theoretically create artificial intelligent robots that when we die off, they are alive, they are conscious, they are what we would call living,
Mhm.
and they advance enough that they can have their own offspring and all this stuff. Well, their origin would be not evolved in evolution per se.
yeah.
It would have been created.
Yeah, so I can see some options like that. And I mean, look, I I can't personally completely rule out supernatural events. I just think that currently abiogenesis research is pointing to that not being a necessary idea. But like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, there's no possible world in which that occurs because
Right.
I don't have enough of a handle on the philosophical topics involved. So I'm going to be like, no, I wouldn't take that position. But I do think that even without that idea about supernatural events, you could come up with some non-evolutionary origins for biospheres outside of Earth. I don't think there's any evidence that that's what happened on Earth. Pretty much all of our options for, I think, panspermia on Earth, I don't think they're really checking out very well.
No, no. No, but that was a good question. Honestly have not sat there and thought about that before. A question I thought about was shadow biomes. So, is there a possibility that there's another biome here on Earth that doesn't share our evolutionary tree? Like it's a completely separate tree from our own.
Right.
And there was a paper that came out a few years ago that was actually disproven that thought they had found that.
Which would be interesting. And I mean, it would be a really interesting revelation, and I don't think anyone would be expecting it, but it also is not something that I think evolutionary biologists would say is just beyond the realm of possibility, right? Like there
No,
could
it's
have
not. Not
been
at all. It's not. I mean, because if life arose once on a planet, there's no reason why it shouldn't be able to rise again. It's just likely that if life arose once, then it's likely to uh, eat whatever arises before it can actually develop. If that makes sense.
yeah. Byron Smith for $5 says, I like the meme that points out that all the instruments we use to find intelligent life are all pointed away from Earth. Right. Yep. Um, let's see. Addicted to Mars says that he was talking about exoplanet, just fantasizing about far away. Well, I think we talked about exoplanets and life potentially on them. So, and hey, who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky with like the James Webb Space Telescope or something.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for something.
Now that it's finally actually on its way to where it's going to be
delayed,
set up.
like 5 years delayed,
Something
or something
like that. Yeah, it's been crazy. Honestly, on the day that it did launch, I was just like, it probably won't happen. And so I wasn't actually watching very carefully because it was like, it's been years now. I don't expect it.
Yep. Well, another thing I didn't expect was what was the helicopter they got on Mars right now? I did
Forget
not
what it's
expect that
called.
thing to fly. Ingenuity. That's what it's
Okay.
called. I did not expect it to fly at all, and or to like take off and then just instantly fall over. But I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, actually, I'd seen some of the flight tests with in vacuum chambers where they lowered the vacuum down to like Mars or lowered the air pressure down to like Mars surface level pressure, and like it had successfully flown, but still I was like, yeah, but like on an actual planet where like all sorts of chaotic stuff can happen and you can just land on a rock and topple. I don't know, man. But yeah, I mean, it's been doing pretty well. So I mean, well done to the engineers and pilots because
yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, that is pretty. Yeah. Oh, did you know that the coelacanth disproves evolution?
In what way, my friend?
Right. So here's a pro tip to anyone who wants to argue against evolution. X exists, therefore not evolution is usually not going to be a sufficient argument.
Right.
Just going to put mostly because it doesn't actually follow most of the time. Now, if you could find something that actually defies an evolutionary explanation, like an actual Pegasus or something, then you might have something there. But spoiler alert, so far we don't have any of those.
That's again on the dragon thing. That's one of the wrong depictions about dragons. If dragons actually existed, they would only have wings and back legs. They wouldn't have four legs and wings because all uh, tetrapods have four legs, four limbs.
Right. All right. Well, I think that's going to be basically it. We went for just over a half an hour on Q&A. I think I got through all of the questions that are worth asking, as well as a whole bunch that weren't. So, is there any final thoughts that you have before we do some quick channel announcements and we get out of here?
No, I mean, if you guys have any more questions for me or anything like that, you can reach me on Twitter. It's at Deacon of Biology. And the reason why I went with that name was because I was originally going to be a preacher, so kind of touching back to my roots. So yeah, if you have any other questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate everyone coming. We had a pretty good showing for, especially for your Leading on Earth Creationism, because I'm aware these are not my most popular streams. Oh, and for $10 from Vandalia 1998, before we go, I'm late, so I'm behind. What is your favorite thing you've learned since you left YEC? And if anyone's interested, Venerable Bede will be talking about Edward III on my channel in 30 minutes. So yeah, real quick, what do you think is your favorite thing that you've learned since you left YEC?
My favorite thing that I've learned since I left YEC. You mean, I guess, as it pertains to biology. It's to me, it's insane. It's, and I don't mean insane like in a bad way, but it's mind-boggling that everything that is alive today shared a common ancestor. That everything that the genetic potential is there to give the diversity of life that we see today, and that's just mind-blowing to me. It's a beautiful thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you. All right, so let's do some quick channel stuff. So later on today, at, like I said, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern, do the math if you're anywhere else, I will be on the Non Sequitur Show with Landon Kurt Knoll, and we will be talking about nuclear disasters and nuclear reactors and all that fun stuff, including someone getting impaled by a nuclear reactor. As far as I know, that's only ever happened once in the history of the world, but it did happen. He was impaled and stuck to the ceiling.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, he didn't make it. As if there were any question about that, right? And for $5 from Gregory Burlington, all the evil in the world is cause of evolution and the globe. How does TJ reconcile that? I mean, it's just not.
It's just, yeah, it's not.
There you go. But hey, thanks for the $5.
Yeah, define evil.
So let's see. Tuesday, which is the next thing that's going to be happening on the channel, is currently scheduled to be an Eric with Erica. So if you like Guts of Gibbon, if you like Dapper Dino, come check that out. We're going to talk about Eric Hovind. We're going to watch some Eric Hovind. We're going to drink. We don't encourage you to drink because it's dangerous, but you know, you're adults, and if you're not adults, then don't drink anyway.
Right.
Let's see. Then Thursday should be the next video in the Andrew Snelling series. And then the Saturday after that, which is going to be the 29th, my plan is for that to be more of reading Kent Hovind's dissertation with guests, which has been a slog to get through, but it's also been amazing. My favorite thing so far is that one of his citations, he's using, very occasionally he uses inline citations, and one of them was the phrase, KJV get book title. And this is supposed to be his doctoral thesis, I will remind you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched. He was addressing Emma Thornton on that because she's. I think she was reading it as well, and he made a video retort.
Yeah, I saw that.
Back.
It was nonsense.
No, it's crazy. He was writing a book, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, the whole thing is completely nonsensical. So yeah, that's as far ahead as I want to make announcements. Last few things, guys. There are currently, I believe, 6 or 7 videos that are up for early access for patrons and channel members. And so if you want to help out the channel, that starts at $1 a month, which you can even reduce to $10 a year if you want to go annual on it. So you get my new videos, like as they're coming out, you get access to the patron and member only Discord channel, which are, or Discord, channel, I think. Anyway, I don't know how Discord works. But yeah, that's a place where I check that pretty regularly. You can usually get a hold of me easily that way. There's also some other perks if you decide to pledge more. And because of that, I'm going to go ahead and put on the end credits, which are going to thank a whole bunch of the people who are at the $5 or above tier. And we have one last super chat that I will read from Gregory Burlington. Again, thank you for the $4.99. How does TJ reconcile that evolution is just a theory?
How do you reconcile that the theory of gravity is just a theory?
Oh, I don't think Gregory believes in gravity.
That's right. So okay, well, I guess I just reconcile it then.
I'll go with this. A theory is the highest level of confidence that science can assign to an idea.
Yes.
Theories,
exactly.
In the colloquial sense, if to become a theory, you have to be proven correct. In the colloquial sense, not the mathematical sense.
Right. Most people, when they use theory, they mean like a hypothesis. But when a scientist uses theory, it means the best explanation we have of the best explanation, the most well supported explanation.
All right.
So a theory is the highest level you can achieve.
All right. Well, we're gonna hit end credits. So if another super chat comes in, guys, sorry. I just want to take a minute to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Bent Hovend, Denny525, Ian Chen, John Ackerman, Landon Knoll, Lingway, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Patrick Dennis. My channel members and patrons help keep the lights on here at Casa Dino, and they also help make this channel possible, because without them, you'd be lucky to get 1 video a week out of me, never mind 3. If you'd like to support either as a patron or a channel member, there are links below. Also, if a monthly pledge or even an annual pledge isn't right for you, there are other ways you can support the channel. There's a merch store and an Amazon wishlist. And of course, if none of that's right for you, just hitting like, sharing this video, and commenting really helps out a lot. Thank you.